All right, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath on this 9th day of April, Tuesday. Joining me now is talented, accomplished author Ellen Brown, back on the program. Put out an excellent article today, Winner Take All, the super priority status of derivatives. I touched on it a little bit in the first hour. And, you know, everything going on right now. First of all, her website is webadet.com. I'm going to forget to say that. Is that right? .com? It's .com, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Webadet.com. Go there, check it out. All of her articles that she writes, she does post there first, and then everybody in the world picks it up. But webadet.com. Go there, bookmark it, check it out often. And we're talking about, you know, if we monitor the mainstream right now, what do we see? We see Pyongyang is about ready to start World War III. We see gun control, things we talked about in that first hour. Gun control debate taking center stage. There's going to be a big vote in the Senate on Thursday. But I still believe that all this stuff that we've talked about that is being done is going to be implemented. This security state, the police state, the confiscation, you know, the ability to stop the people from defending themselves or protecting what they have, and the force necessary to make the populace compliant is all being put into place not for Kim Jong-un or for North Korea or for Iran. It's being put into place because I do believe, you know, with all my heart, they understand what's coming here, you know, and it's going to be an absolute financial disaster. And will this usher in a global financial governance like these power elite have talked about? I think that is the plan. But it isn't going to come from a rogue nation, a rogue tiny state that can't feed its people. It's going to come from a bunch of rogue bankers and a bunch of rogue technocrats who have engineered the planet, the financial system of the planet, to do what we're talking about, imploding. This article, you know, you start out, Ellen, with Cyprus-style confiscation of depositors has become the new normal. Bail-in policies are appearing in multiple countries. Let's get into it. You know, last time you were on the program, we talked about the bail-in, and we talked about Cyprus, and they tried to sell this, I believe, you know, I'm trying to remember the guy's name now, Dijsselbloem, who is one of the head, is that his name, Dijsselbloem? I think I said it right.
He's the finance minister of Holland, or the Dutch finance minister, but
he's the president of the board of governors of the ESM as well. And, you know, he made the statement that this will be the pattern going forward. RT asked me to write an article on that, which I did, and they rejected because by the time their editor got that article, she had sent me back a letter saying, it's a great article. However, Dijsselbloem has recanted his statement. And I sent one back saying, I don't care. He made the statement. Even if he takes it back, it's kind of like being almost pregnant. You either are or you're not. He said the statement. He played the hand, and you know, I said this article is going to stand the way it is. Because I believe this is the model they're going to use going forward, and this is proving to be 100% true. Correct?
Correct. It's coming up in Canada, New Zealand, the EU, the UK, and the US in this FDIC UK directive. It was a Bank of England directive. And they all use the same language. And the language goes back to a directive coming from the Bank for International Settlements, which says that henceforth, instead of relying on taxpayers to bail out the banks, that they should bail themselves out from their stockholders first, and then their creditors. And of course, the creditors include they're not explicit about it, including depositors, but we just saw in Cyprus that's exactly what they have in mind. That Dutch finance minister, the ESM,
Dijsselbloem.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The ESM was required to bail out the banks at the very last minute, like the day before they had to get all these signatories in July of last year. Suddenly there was this all-night meeting, and the next day it turned out that they were going to not only bail out each other, the countries, but they were going to bail out the banks. So you could see where the head of the ESM probably didn't approve of that. And if it's either that they get the money from Germany, which is the only, the big pot of money over there, or they get it from the depositors because there is not enough money. And the thing that I just wrote about is that ever since 2005, the Bankruptcy Act of 2005, and it's confirmed in Dodd-Frank, the derivatives bets go first. So the derivatives claimants take first out of the pot if there's a bankruptcy of a big bank, or if it's insolvent. The idea of these bail-ins is that you don't let it go bankrupt. You're going to try and save the thing by getting the capital somewhere else. So your capital the value of your capital is diminished relative to all your outstanding loans, let's say, which is obviously happening all over. And so you need to get more capital. Where do you get it? You could go after your shareholders, but it turns out as soon as there's the appearance of insolvency or whatever, then the derivatives players get to go and grab their collateral, and they all do it. That's what happened in Lehman Brothers. They all ran for their collateral, and it was after J.P. Morgan took theirs that Lehman Brothers actually did go bankrupt, because that wiped out their capital. And that's what will happen if another big bank goes under, if you allow all the derivatives players to go first before the other creditors, which would include not even just the depositor, the ordinary depositors like us, but even the secured depositors are next in line after the derivatives.
Okay, and you got to break this down for me. And if I'm having trouble siphoning through this, I'm sure a lot of people are. Well, we talk about derivatives, and these are things that they're not regulated, right? These are creations, these are monsters being created by these same institutions, right? By J.P. Morgan, by Wells Fargo, by Goldman Sachs. These are instruments that are being created on something else. The true nature or definition of a derivative. It is derived from something else. So they're like bets on top of debt. And so with the Dodd-Frank Act and with the bankruptcy laws of 2005, you're telling me that these folks holding these derivatives that are not regulated, there's nothing governing these except for the will of the banks, they get first crack at the money that's surrounding an institution that is being cannibalized. That makes sense?
Yeah, that's right. And that could be huge. There's 12 trillion supposedly in actual cash at risks from all the derivatives. JP Morgan has 30% of all derivatives. So let's assume a third of 12 trillion. They could have a $4 trillion bust. And there's only 25 billion in the FDIC insurance fund. And Dodd-Frank expressly says that we are not going to bail out another derivatives disaster, that you guys are on your own, figure it out for yourselves. So what they should have said is you can't do the derivatives, or they should have split the banks up the way they were under Glass-Steagall. But instead, they said, we're going to let you continue to play. We're just not going to bail you out. So you'll have to figure it out for yourselves. And under this directive that came down from the Bank for International Settlements, and that was echoed in one of the FDIC, Bank of England, and there's one in New Zealand that's even more explicit, that just says they're going to take the depositors' funds. And what we saw in Cyprus, and there's one coming from the EU, and there's one in Australia. So they all say the same thing, which is that they're going to go after the creditors' money. And of course, their big creditors are their depositors in a bank like J.P. Morgan or Bank of America, which are the two. Well, I guess of the three top derivatives players, J.P. Morgan and Bank of America are two.
Well, but when we look at the actual amount of cash, you're talking 12. You said 12 trillion. Is that globally? I mean, is that global deposits of?
I think that's U.S. banks.
Okay.
The U.S. banks are at risk.
Well, and we know that the derivatives
are 6 banks. That's only 6 banks. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we're going to be back with Ellen Brown. More Wide Awake news, more terrifying financial reality on the backside of this break. Hang tight. All right, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio on this 9th day of April, Tuesday. Ellen Brown joining us, trying to expose this what I described during the break as this is the true crime against all humanity that is happening as we speak. I mean, we're being led down a path of we need to go to war, we need to boost our military, we need to kill this guy, we need to invade that nation. But while this is going on and the media is celebrating this patriotic air quote endeavor, we have laws being passed over the last several years and being brought to the forefront now that is going to make it completely and totally status quo for banks to fail and people to just absolutely lose everything, or at least be in the line to lose everything to secure some of the failures of these banks. And I said to Ellen during the break, I mean, what a gloriously beautiful design, right? We have a financial crisis in 2008, and we have a freak out of the markets. We have a complicit mainstream media that benefits enormously from the bailout and from the companies that were bailed out. And we have legislation written that doesn't do anything to protect the people of this country. It does everything to protect the systemic nature of these institutions and make them even more so. And at the end of it, after all this transfer of fraudulent failure vis-a-vis sovereign debt around the world, after all this is played out and their failure's gone and they're trading and making big bucks again on derivatives and markets are soaring, you could just let it all go falling apart, and the last grab will be for the actual wealth that the individuals are holding. Now, I said when John Rubino was on the other night that this makes sense to see this out here now, to see this kind of talk out here now, grabbing the savings, the 401ks, the retirement plan, because in 2008 they talked about this. This was run up the flagpole then, where they talked about, oh, we'll get into these 401ks and we'll stop the loss and we'll give them bonds equal to the amount of that 401k before the market collapsed in 2009, and then it all kind of just went away. But now we're seeing that kind of talk come back to the surface again, and it's probably, you and I would probably agree on this. We understand that this isn't going to last forever. There's going to be a massive, not correction, a massive implosion of our current system. And there's going to be a lot of people who are absolutely devastated, who think and have thought that things were being done on their behalf with things such as Dodd-Frank. But my question, Ellen, is this. If these banks, as we saw in Cyprus, now the ESM, the European Union, is saying, they first asked for 6 to 10% that had to get approved through the Parliament of Cyprus. The Parliament said, no, wait, you're not doing it. So they said, okay, we'll take 40%. They implemented this grab of cash in ways that didn't involve Parliament inside of Cyprus. They went around Parliament and they went right to the biggest shareholders of these banks. How will, you've talked about England and Canada and New Zealand and Australia and Dodd-Frank. How is all this going to be enforced? I mean, is the government just going to put their hands up and say, well, we're not going to bail them out, America, but they're going to bail you in? Who implements this automatic seizure of cash? Is it the institutions themselves?
Well, I don't think they seize the cash. That's the thing. The cash is gone. They do the procedure that's set up in the 2005 Bankruptcy Act and in the Dodd-Frank, which is that the derivatives players get to net out all their dealings, and they get the money that's there. And then when we come for our claim, they say, well, we don't have it, so we're going to give you stock instead. We'll give you stock in the bank. Not to worry, you've now got stock in a bank. And that would actually work if they actually it seems to me that in Cyprus, for example, you could take this stock in these banks, and if the government were to declare, we acknowledge that X amount of stock in these banks, which was formerly cash, we declare that to be of equal value of that amount of cash, and we'll accept it in the payment of taxes, and you can trade it with each other. In other words, they actually need to expand the money supply. There's only one deep pocket that could solve this problem. If we have let's assume we have another $700 billion crisis. Mm-hmm. Congress this time says, sorry, you were playing in derivatives. We're not going to cover that. It says right there in Dodd-Frank, you were warned, And so who's going to step in? I mean, the FDIC theoretically is supposed to cover all those deposits. Who's going to fill up the difference between the 25 billion and the 700 billion? The Federal Reserve is the only entity that has the power to simply print the money. So that's why, to me, the logical, obvious solution is to have public banks. In other words, a public bank is a thing that has the power to say, all right, we acknowledge that those were your numbers. They're not going anywhere because we have the power to create numbers. And we will always acknowledge your numbers as your numbers. They're perfectly secure because we're only talking about numbers. Why is it that they have to play with our numbers to do their game over here? Why aren't our numbers just something that's up there, like your Gmail or something, that you can always retrieve? And it's...
All right, let's take a break. We'll get back into that on the backside. We'll be back with Ellen Brown and more Wide Awake News Radio in just a minute. Hang tight. It's Ellen Brown knocking at my door. Welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. We'll continue the conversation on derivatives and the fact that the folks holding these derivatives, which we were talking about during the break, Ellen, were not even legal, let's say pre-19, they were illegal pre-1990 or 19 in the 80s. You know, these things were not even allowed because of the nature of them. And now they are on the verge of shutting down the global economy. And I mean, it's easy to look at how corporate interest and collusion between corporate and government interest have led to this expansion of debt, expansion of derivatives, the economic woes that the world is facing, and see the cause of it. But you know, most people don't. They're just they're tuned into whatever their pop culture demands that they be tuned into. And the simple answer would be, as I asked you in the break, just a jubilee of it all. Just say, hey, you know what? This is false. It's wrong. We should have never happened. So we're not going to allow this to happen. And Gary jumped in and said it's never going to happen. And I probably agree with him. I believe that they'll use the derivatives. They'll use the sovereign debt crisis of the world to implode the current system and offer us something that might sound better. It might sound great. Like you're going to get a bunch of stocks and there's going to be this debt wiped out. There won't be any more derivatives. And guess what? We're going to have gold-backed currency. Everything's going to be, this wonderful new government or new global governance. But in reality, it'll be even more onerous than our current system. Is that theory just completely a nuts, or do you see this derivatives nightmare and sovereign debt nightmare being used as a tool, as I do?
Oh, I do see it as a tool. I don't think you could really do a jubilee across the board because, I mean, many of the creditors are us. So, I mean, if somebody owes you money and the deal's up, well, in fact, we're creditors of the bank. Now, if you did a jubilee, the bank will say, well, we don't owe you that money anymore, go away. And there we've just lost our money. So it's not that easy to just say we're just going to get rid of all debt, because the other side of every debt is a creditor, although some of them may not be nice guys. Right. A lot of them are just ordinary people that are going to suffer if they can't collect on that debt.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but with what we've been talking about for the first half of the program, the depositors are going to end up losing it. I mean, we are in the crosshairs. The little person's in the crosshairs. So lose it one way, lose it another. It looks like it's if it plays out in this scenario, we're losing it. I mean, these banks are going to eventually fail. At least on paper, they're going to fail. I don't think the CEOs and the leadership and the folks truly behind these banking institutions really care, because they'll just consolidate power into fewer organizations. But at the end of the day, the people of the world are the ones who end up shouldering the burden of the loss.
Yeah, but of course, my thing is public banking. Yeah. I'm president of the Public Banking Institute, and that's why I think, it's even the government revenues that are at risk here, because they put their money in big Wall Street banks because they've got the capacity to do their payroll and all these complicated things. So it would behoove state governments to set up a Bank of North Dakota in every state, a publicly owned bank, where their own revenues will be protected. They don't need FDIC insurance. The Bank of North Dakota doesn't have it. And then they could, I'm also in favor of a postal bank situation where we, the people, can all put our money in the postal banks. So it's going to be backed by the government because it is the government. The government has to stand behind your deposit in a postal bank. I mean, they can't say their whole excuse for not standing behind it in Dodd-Frank is that it's this gambling and derivatives, and they can't see it. It's not clear what's going on, and so we the taxpayers aren't going to be liable. But surely we the taxpayers would be liable for a postal bank that we owned that was doing nothing but taking in deposits and very basic banking. That would be a totally secure place to put your money. And otherwise, looking around now, I mean, where is even safe? I've heard rumors that they're making you report your gold and silver, that they can bust into your safety deposit box for national security reasons, which of course it would be if there was a big collapse. If you buy, you could put your money in a house, but then you're probably going to owe on a mortgage, and then you could get in trouble. I mean, there's really nothing safe to do with your money. And other countries have been through this, like Russia, where in the 90s, there was this big push for privatization. And so people were moving their money into the private banks, which had nice profits. They looked like they were doing well. And then all of a sudden there was the Asian crisis of 1998, and people's bank accounts got wiped out. And that, of course, that totally freaked them out. And so they rushed back to the public banks, and that's where they know they're safe. And so the public banks are growing in Russia. I mean, they're dominant, but the private banks can't even get a foothold anymore because they just can't compete with the security of a public bank, the fact that the public bank is backed by the government, and therefore they can make, they control where the loans go, and they can make loans that are good for the economy. So, I mean, they can set it up so that it actually serves the people rather than being this sort of extractive, exploitative thing that parasitizes the people.
Yeah, that it definitely is. And you've come on before and talked about North Dakota. You've also talked about how some nations started out with a public bank, and it had served them well for a long time. But it seems as once the money changers get their talons into the banking system, it's just a matter of time before it's exploited through different exotic vehicles. And next thing you know, it's a dire emergency that the people come in and rescue them. And it just didn't happen in 2008. It's just not going to happen again in 2013. It's happened time and time again throughout history. Do you see with your organization and you being a very strong proponent of national or of state banks, do you see that spreading? I know in Montana it's being talked about. How about in the rest of the country? I mean, what are you seeing?
We have 20 states that have introduced legislation of one sort or another for a public bank. We haven't actually got any, I shouldn't say we, but none have actually passed yet. But there's definitely a lot of interest, and the interest is growing. And I just think it's our only chance that it would, another $700 billion disaster will happen. Yeah. And so we need to set something up before it happens, or otherwise we're going to be in the police state. They'll have their excuse. The people will take to the streets and riot, just like in Cyprus. But in Cyprus, they didn't have all these conspiratorial things that we're not allowed to talk about that we think are set up and ready for us. So
you can talk about whatever you want, Ella Brown. You're free to speak your mind.
We're in it. But if we can do something ahead of time, if we can anticipate what's coming and set up something secure and workable that actually serves the community, serves the people, and is safe for the people, it's not like you have to put all the private banks out of business. All we're talking about is setting up a public bank. Give us an option. Give us the option to move into the public bank if we want to.
Well, I think that option would be the death sentence of these private banks, and rightfully so. Because you are going to, as the depositors, the little people of the land, right? We're going to opt for security every single time, especially folks, which is the entire planet, who've lived through recent financial crises. Absolutely, they're going to go into this more secure public bank where the money is not being gambled on Wall Street and could potentially be lost overnight. So I think it would spell the end of greedy public or private banks, and that's why it will be tooth and nail, dying tooth and nail these the public bank or the current model or the private banks and the current model we have now. We'll be back with Ellen Brown and more Wide Awake News Radio in just a minute. Hang tight. Winner Takes All, the super priority status of derivatives by Ellen Brown. We've been talking about this article. You can find her work over at webadet.com and just about every other independent media site on the internet, because everybody picks up her stuff and runs with it. Ellen, this final segment here, how do you see this playing out? I mean, do you see, first of all, here we sit in April of 2013 with a doubling, reasonably safe assessment is we've doubled our sovereign debt between the last half of the second term of George W. Bush and Barack Obama. We've doubled our sovereign debt. We've had a crisis. We've had legislation like Dodd-Frank that is supposed to come in and fix the problem. And here we sit, doubling in our sovereign debt. Our unemployment rate is still ridiculously high. None of these institutions have really paid. A few individuals here and there have been called to the carpet, but as a whole, these institutions are still intact and running the show more so than before the collapse. No Glass-Steagall, no breakup of investment banks and bank holding companies. No curbing the enthusiasm of Wall Street to borrow free money and speculate to the moon, not lending it out to stoke growth in the economy and just sitting there reaping the profits, knowing full well that at the end of the day, when the final swan song occurs, it's going to be all falling back onto the shoulders of the people. The system is totally disgusting when you look at it from that perspective. Unfortunately, most people don't. They look at it from the perspective of the last quarter or the last 6 months, and they think, well, I got a job still, so things must be getting better. When, Ellen, you're vastly more experienced and educated on these topics. Do you see us just trudging along and doubling the sovereign debt again, going to 20, 30, 40, 50 trillion dollars in sovereign debt? Or do you see Cyprus, do you see the legislation being talked about in these other nations as being a very loud canary in the coal mine of what we're entering into sooner rather than later?
Yep, definitely a canary in the coal mine. But it does seem to me that all this can be fixed. I mean, there are many things that you could do to fix the banking situation, which is reimpose Glass-Steagall, do a financial transaction tax, if nothing else, to pad out the FDIC fund so the money will be there when they have the next crisis. They don't have near enough money for a crisis like the one we just had. So we obviously know it's possible. You could nationalize the banks, the big ones, the ones that are. I think nationalization is a good idea, but not the way they've done it, where they call it nationalization, but we get to take the losses and then they put it back. They let it run again and go back to its evil.
Which is what we have. Which is what just happened. I mean, in essence, we've nationalized the failure.
Exactly. No, you should nationalize it and keep the thing. If we're going to bear the losses, we need to have the profits and we need to have control. I mean, I agree that big international banks serve purposes. And if you break them up, I mean, you can't really break them up. You need those particular services. And if we don't offer them, then our corporations will be going to the London banks, which are even worse, in worse shape than ours in terms of, more. I mean, they did the Liver scandal and all that. So the better thing, it seems to me, is we just need to have control of all this. We, the people, need to have control. But how do we get it? And for that, the very first thing is, obviously, they're not going to hand it to us. Our legislators are not going to see the light and fix everything. We have to make them fix it. And before we can do that, we have to understand it. And that means, sort of everybody has to be on the same page. So I think that's the stage we are in history, where we're all just waking up. But you see people waking up to different things, that we all kind of get it, that Wall Street is not working out so well. But there's the gold people and there are all these different solutions being proposed, and we don't in fact, that we're sort of in conflict with each other about the solutions. So I do think that that we could pull it off and get it together fast enough to actually do some of the demand some of these solutions and actually have it happen. I think it would be great to have a third party, because it does seem like the existing two parties are captured.
Yeah. I don't think it looks like. I think it's a fact that they're captured. They dance to the tune of Lloyd Blankfein and his ilk. There's no question about that. I mean, that's reality that is very much provable. But it's also, unfortunately, a reality that any third party, before, and this has been my tenant for quite a while, before we go into the next Uber collapse crisis, the next, and I'm not talking 2008 $700 billion. I'm talking about the realization of a $250 derivatives monster chomping down humanity around this planet, and this sovereign debt landmine goes off. Before that kind of a disaster, there's not going to be the will for the people to stand up and demand it. I hope I'm wrong, but we talking. Good.
If you look back historically, those are the times when things change, when everything collapses. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. But the whole derivatives thing is literally a black hole. Like, it's all built on, it's all these bets that are built on each other. So you're supposed to pay off this one, and then there's, it's like a chain of people paying each other off, and there's nothing there. There's only a little bit of collateral for this whole thing. So like a black hole, once it starts collapsing on itself, the whole thing will just poof, it'll all be gone. And and then there goes our whole economy. But then we'll be back to where Argentina was, or Iceland was, or
Russia.
Yeah, or actually Germany, 1930, where everything's been wiped out. And so it's a whole new game. It's like, well, we can't pay these debts, so let's forget about that. And now let's think of how we could set up a system that would actually work. And it's possible. There are systems that actually work, and it's been done historically numerous times. I would argue that the reason they're not still there is they got beaten out by the other system, not because the system didn't work, but because like you say, that the money lenders got in there and managed to.
Yeah, and it looks very attractive, right? It looks very attractive if you're sitting there, and I'll just think, small time in history, right? From the end of World War II until the destruction of Glass-Steagall in 1999. It was probably it was very attractive to look at some of these giant institutions that became more and more giant because of their speculation and these great returns, and they would lure politicians in with their track record, their short-term track record, not wanting them to understand the history of banking, and then they would lure them in with their contributions to their political campaigns, and eventually everything flipped. You went from a system that was designed to separate these things that we're talking about. The bank holding companies that are holding our deposits are not supposed to be able to be out there investing and speculating to the point where, when it all goes belly up, poof, as you say, the people are going to be the ones that log into their account and find out there's nothing left because it all went to this fraudulent derivatives nightmare. So I agree that on the backside of the disaster will be the time. And we do need you out there. We need folks just like you out there crying for new systems that are beneficial to the people. And you know what? I'm gonna get emails from this because I do every time you're on. Because you have people that absolutely love you, which is most of the people. But then there's people who think that when you and I are talking, we're talking in some form of fanciful communism where you have government-owned banks and all this, that, and the other thing. And that, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, we are more under the thumb of government-controlled banking or collusion between government and private banking interests right now than we ever would be with a public-backed system that was exposed to the light of day and had checks and balances and had the interests of the people come first. We certainly don't have anything like that now, and anything sold to us as free market capitalist about our banking system now, you know what, they need to go back to school and figure out what the difference between fascism and free market capitalism. That was my little rant on you there.
I totally agree. Well, and in that the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement that's on the table, where they would try to prevent public banks because it's unfair competition. So I think it's totally fair competition. I mean, if you have a model that works, if it works better than the others, that's the model you should be moving into. I mean, you can't, because the big corporations have control, they're legislating that we can't do a competitive system that works better. That's happened in Europe, where they had a lot of public banks, and the public banks were forced to go private effectively. I mean, they weren't allowed to use their government guarantees, and they were forced to try to make money to compete with the other banks. And that's why those big Landesbank in Germany got in trouble, because they were doing derivatives, but they had to do derivatives. They were being forced into it by the EU in the EU system. If you let them do the public model, it'll win every time. I mean, it does. Well, I'm just writing on that. I'm almost done with this book. But in Asia, in China and Japan and India, they didn't have time to fool around with supporting this parasitic banker class. So so they set up banks that actually worked for the economy as a whole, and they've obviously, they're running circles around us in terms of growth and jobs.
Competitiveness. And competitiveness even in the financial industry. I mean, they're and not that I'm a proponent of the systems that are in place around the world that seem to be thriving now, because it was our system that seemed to be thriving for the last 50 years. But in reality, it was just a simple setting up the stage for ultimate failure because of massive corruption. I mean, that's always the end tail, is you have a system collapse, financial system collapse, due to massive corruption. And to think that a public bank wouldn't work because it's not fair competition. We have a public bank. Our system right now, at least for these giant monster institutions, it is a public banking system. The public gets the loss while they get to maintain, the profit, and they get to maintain their ability to be so systemic. So, Ellen Brown, always interesting to have you on here. I love your point of view. I love your website, webadet.com. And I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and imparting it on us tonight.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you very much. We'll get you back on again real soon. Please stay tuned for Jeff Rentz, because he is coming up next. Tomorrow night, we have Mark Passio and Larkin Rose. Should be a great program. We will see you then. Again, enjoy Jeff. He's coming up next. Have a good night. Peace.